Thanks and welcome to Anna.
I haven't had a drink all day, so thank you for keeping me sober this afternoon. There are some questions which have come up, and I'm going to try and get through as many of the other questions on the spreadsheet as possible. Someone said, how do I get a temporary sponsor? You find someone that you would like to be a temporary sponsor, and you say, would you be my temporary sponsor? And if they say no, just repeat until someone says yes. And if you decide at any point that you have had enough of them, the deal is off, go and get someone else. If my main motive for making amends, if I'm honest, is to look good or to manage impressions, should I still make the amends? I don't think I've ever taken an action in AA with complete purity of motive. So purity was one of the 4 tenets. I'm given to understand one of the tenets in any case. The 4 absolutes, that's it. 4 absolutes of the Oxford Groups, which was a Christian organisation which AA adopted much of the programme from. And they struggled with the purity side of things. And I can understand that. I struggle with the purity side of things in all sorts of fundamental ways. But just because I've got a secondary motive in doing something right doesn't make the right thing suddenly wrong. So, if you owe the bank some money, just because you want the bank to like you as well does not mean you should hold the money back from them. The bank won't say, yes, we want you to make sure that you're doing this for pure motives. So then you can pay us. No, they just want the money. People have been owed an apology for a very long time, and you're going to withhold it for a bit longer until you're Princess Parfait on the spiritual level. Just go and do the amend. And I can't tell you how often I've accepted a 12-step call or done some service, heavy of heart on the way there, not wanting to do it, but walking on air, and I leave it. So, acting right can very often bring about my spirit rises to meet it, as it were, so that it gets purified by the taking of the action. And something that Clancy also says is the steps don't care why you take them. They'll work anyway. If you wait around until you're spiritual before you take them, you're going to be waiting a long time. If I'm afraid to see someone, does that mean I haven't forgiven them, or does it mean I owe them an amends? If I'm frightened to see someone, I think they can harm me in some way, and I'm wrong. The thing which will cause me psychic discomfort is my own reaction to them, so something does need to be done in my experience. However, I was describing a difficult situation in my life to my friend Tom, and he said, having heard the description of the situation, this person, clearly borderline personality, only happy if everybody around them is in chaos. So there are people who I will minimise contact with because there is no good purpose to me having contact with them. It just causes trouble and gets in the way. So there are legitimate reasons to go left, not right. I don't have to be friends with everyone, but I'm not frightened of anyone. If I am, the problem lies with me. I'm investing them with a power that they don't have. I'm doing something to myself which I'm projecting out onto them, and that needs to be dealt with. It doesn't happen instantly. It takes years, in my experience, years of work in AA to start to see that my experience of life is not the world doing it to me. It's my story about the world which is doing it to me. But that's not an instant lesson, so don't expect it to be instant. Like every time I can see an example of that is a great victory. if I've been technically right in talking to a sponsee, but the spirit of it is off because I'm in ego, how should I make amends to them? I do apologise to sponsees. There's a boundary of unacceptable behaviour on my part. If I get too shrill or too harsh or too hectoring in my tone or excessively critical, then I will phone them up and apologise. And every time I've done that, they say, "Oh, don't worry about it, blah, blah, blah," but I'm glad I did it. And it does clear the air. And something a friend of mine says is that if you do actually apologise when you cross that line, of course one has to determine for oneself where that line is, it can't be legislated. When I started to apologise for crossing that line, I stopped crossing the line because I knew I'd have to make amends for it. Somehow the repeated apology, kept the behaviour in bounds. But it's taken a long time. But the making amends to them is I've just got to change the behaviour. And I said earlier, I don't always answer the phone. If I'm tense, what I'll do is I'll get relaxed and then call them back 5 minutes later. Other tricks, in case any of you occasionally get tense with sponsees, is to pray while the phone is ringing so that you're in a prayerful state when you answer the phone. One thing that I've learned from yoga is to have phone calls while I'm lying on my back, because it's very hard to take a harsh tone of voice just from the physical position. When my body is physically relaxed, it can really, really help me not to be tense in my conversation. And to pause and pause and pause and pause and pause. And if I start to feel really tense, and there's often, I have played lots of psychological games in my life, not intentionally, but because I was trained to, and I've had to be trained out of it by AA. So of course, I get sponsees who do the same. Sometimes you realise you're hooked into the game. You know there's a game going on and there's a script being played out, but you can't figure out how to get out of it or what the appropriate thing to say is. And whatever you know that whatever you say next is going to be wrong. This is where I say, something's just come up. I'll give you a call back later today. So hang tight. And what that really means is I have no idea what to say to you. I'm going to wait. I've never waited and then responded and regretted it. But I very often regretted responding instantly. And sometimes, a friend of mine in America says that she won't do texting with sponsees, or she won't do emails with sponsees. And I understand the reason for that. You can hear stuff over the phone that you can't gather from a text message or a WhatsApp message. But having WhatsApp, I've got WhatsApp on my computer so that when I'm at work, if I'm having a fallow patch or on a break, I can type very quickly answers to people. And sometimes, if I'm having a telephone conversation with someone who's going through a difficult time or just is a difficult person, if I'm forced to respond instantly in a telephone conversation, they won't get the best answer. If I'm giving myself 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour before I respond, and then I respond, number one, they'll get a much better answer. Number two, they'll have the answer in writing. I know that what people say to me is not what I hear, so I know that what I say to sponsees is not what they hear. So there is a big case for doing a lot of work in writing with big pauses in between so that I can think about things properly. And a friend of mine says that with a particular person he knows, he never responds within the hour. He always gives it at least an hour so that he knows the response is the right response. I've got to have the response come from my high power, not from me, because I get hooked into the old scripts. And the old scripts, I mentioned Al-Anon earlier. My first Al-Anon meeting was in 1995, and I benefited enormously from the wisdom of Al-Anon. The book One Day at a Time in Al-Anon is enormously helpful. And my friend Tom is an Al-Anon. He's been in Al-Anon since 1978, and he helps me enormously as well. But my basic Al-Anon problem in relation to the addict, to the alcoholic, to the crazy person generally, is I started to alight on this earlier, but I'm going to complete the picture. I don't feel responsible for me because I haven't got time, but I am responsible for you. As a friend of mine says, the defect of character is fix, change, control. That's one word. Fix, change, control. You're not responsible for you, but you are responsible for me. And the you're not responsible for you, I would become a doormat and accept unacceptable behaviour from people because I exonerate them too quickly. I won't set boundaries when boundaries need to be set. I indulge things which won't need to be indulged because I'm frightened of their reaction. I treat people as infants. This is you're not responsible for you, which gives me license to take charge and take care of you. And then the you're responsible for me can come in all sorts of ways. I would seek out alcoholics and addicts to rescue me. I mean, talk about a plan which is doomed to fail. But there is an energy in alcoholics and addicts that I don't feel often in people who are not. And that energy, I want it to like a vampire, to suck off. So I would seek out alcoholics and addicts, and their job was to fix me, and if they didn't, they were in serious trouble. And so there was that whole wanting people to rescue me, wanting people to save me, to fix me, to pay my bills, to do everything for me that I ought to be doing for myself. And then everything I felt was your fault, because I'd put you in charge. So that whole thing of letting my whole life go to rack and ruin, and nothing ever being my fault, putting myself in charge of you, making you responsible, not for yourself, but for me, that whole craziness, because I grew up with that, I would start to play out in sponsorship relationships, which is why I need a lot of emotional distance. If I get emotionally involved in the situation of a sponsee, I am toast, and so are they. And I don't become friends with sponsees. There is one exception, it's a very unusual situation. But when I become friends with sponsees, it always poisons the sponsorship, because there are things that I need to be saying which I don't want to say because I don't want to lose the friendship. And I don't even know I'm doing it. The blind spot gets automatically switched on. I've got to not care what they say about me, what they think about me. And this is part of the tradition 8 as it's applied in my sponsorship relationship. So not being professional, it means all sorts of things. It means that I'm not set up as an authority, I'm just an alcoholic sharing some experience. You can leave at any point at which it stops being useful. But I don't want anything from you. If I want something from you, we now have a transaction. It's no longer love, which is giving of yourself for fun and for free, expecting nothing in return. It's a transaction where I'm trying to get something from you. And that thing that I'm getting from you is on the line every time I'm called upon to challenge your behaviour or your viewpoint. So there's got to be a huge distance in sponsorship relationships. I phoned up an old sponsor, Brian, many years ago, and said, I didn't have many problems at the time, there wasn't much cause to call him. I said, can we just meet for a coffee just to hang out together? He said, you know we're not friends, don't you? And he's very nice, he always asks after me, I always ask after him. I have a different sponsor now. And, my sponsor lives in Texas. I go and stay with him. I've gone to stay with him many times. I'm going to be seeing him at the International next year. We're going to have a road trip with him and his sponsor and his sponsor's wife. I see a lot of them. We hang out a lot. But it's very clear in those deals, he is still my sponsor. That line must not be crossed. Let's see what else we have here. What are your views on stepping out of a non-recovering, addicted, narcissistic, remorseless parent's life due to constant abuse? My mother has been very aggressive towards me at times. And there have been times when I've had to say, if you carry on this line, I'm going to put the phone down. And I've had to put the phone down. There have been times I've said, if this carries on, I'm going to leave. And I leave. But I remain 100% responsible for my emotional reaction to the other person. So if I'm feeling discomfort beyond the compassion for someone who is in suffering, if I'm feeling discomfort, that is my issue. And a friend of mine says about how people like to, and this is not just alcoholics, just people generally like to put on the holy mask of innocence and to go through the world thinking, I'm just so nice. It's everybody else who has the issues. If everybody else would behave, if only everyone else would behave, things would be so much better. It's the bottom of 61 about the politicians and reformers who are sure that the rest of the world would be fixed if only everyone would behave. The minister sighing over the sins of the 20th century. And, you know, the tears of compassion rolling down your face, says my friend Earl, the tears of compassion rolling down your face as you think of all the cruelties meted out to innocent people like you and me by all these terrible people. He said, if that's your existential position, that you're the holy innocent one and it's everybody else that has the issues, you're the one with the issues. But you've denied them, which is why you're seeing them in everyone else. And you can't get rid of these relationships because you can't get rid of that part of yourself. So you find people that you can act that out with. And the funny thing is, when I started to face my own darkness, I stopped seeing that darkness in other people. So the real question is, what is the darkness that I don't want, the rage that I don't want to? It might be neat middle class rage, but it's still rage. Rage is rage. Whether it gets expressed with a pen that digs too deeply into the piece of paper or firing a missile, the emotion behind it is the same. And it's murderous. And I don't like that. I don't like to be the one with that darkness. But I can't get rid of it out of my consciousness because it's deep inside me. So, lo and behold, what do I see in the world around me? I see myself. However, you know, I won't be abused by anyone. So, a friend of mine asked a rabbi, about some business deal, do I sue or do I forgive? He said, first you forgive, then you sue. If you want a practical solution and a spiritual solution at the same time, go to a rabbi. This is just one of the great truths. So there may be, with lots of relationships in my life, there's been no good reason. There's no good purpose served in me remaining in an interaction with someone who is crazy or narcissistic or remorseless or borderline personality or whatever it is. There is no good purpose to me being there. But that's the reason for withdrawing, not because they bring up some discomfort in me. However, I can't punch above my spiritual weight. And what that means is, sometimes, you see, all of the lessons spiritually in the curriculum are compulsory, but I get to choose when to take the lesson. So sometimes I'm just not up to a situation. I'm not up to dealing with a personality type. I had like 2 or 3 years when I didn't see my parents at all. It became so toxic I couldn't deal with it. I realised it was my problem, and I went and dealt with it, and I gradually tiptoed back into the relationship. So it's not to say that I don't separate, but it has to be with the understanding. If I separate, I'm not like, oh, I've solved the problem now, I've separated myself from the cause of the problem. I've seen this in myself. My psychic link to the people that I set a boundary to because they're too toxic remains as active and live in separation from them as it was when I'm in interaction with them. And when I go back a number of years later, it's all still there, intact. And where I've really had to learn the lesson is in real time, forgiving them again and again and again. And by forgiveness, it means when I was with my mother, she doesn't act out anymore, and it does a little bit. But she barely acts out compared to what she used to do. I mean, when Jonathan and I would go and see, Jonathan is my other half, when we would go and see her, he'd go to Tesco's to get some chocolates and get some champagne, knowing that she would need 20 minutes to just launch everything at me. She'd get it out of her system. He'd come back with the bribes, the champagne, the chocolates, everything would be fine for the rest of the weekend. But this needed to happen. These attacks would keep coming. And what I had to do every time a so-called attack would come at me, to look past it to the human being behind it that was trapped inside an ego which was launching the missiles at me, and to remain spiritually in contact with that. And the image that a friend of mine gave is, imagine you sitting there and the other person, you sitting here, the other person sitting over there, and above your head is a little avatar of you, and above their head is a little avatar of them, a little picture, a little cartoon picture, and it's the cartoon pictures which are having the fight. Don't become the cartoon picture. That's the play that's on the stage. You're the actor, you're not the part. You're the actor, you're not Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. Let the characters do what they're doing, but don't become the characters. As soon as I believe that I'm the character that I'm playing, if I'm the son and she disinherits me, which she uses the will, she doesn't do it anymore, but she would use the will as one of the weapons in the family. So if you did something wrong, you would be disinherited, or the fraction, the maths in her wills were who has a will with 28 parts of things, like, 2 28ths or 3 28ths? No one knows where this came from. But it enabled her to use the will as a set of weapons. If I think I'm a son, and that is my identity, and she says, you are no son of mine anymore, my being has literally been destroyed. I have to remember that the actor is not hurt when the character on the stage is punished or hurt in some way. If I can, when she is acting out, or when anyone is acting out, if I can remain the actor, this is, straight from page 61 and then page 60 and page 62 of the big book, in this drama of life, it ain't real. There is something real going on here, which is the spiritual interaction between the spirits communicating through the physical forms. But this is just a play. If I can remember that and remain in spiritual contact with the spirit behind the other person, eventually, in my experience with my family members, those attacks have stopped because it's just arrows being shot into the fog. They don't hit anything anymore. And as soon as the arrows stop hitting, or as soon as the bullets stop hitting, the game's no fun. Because to pitch, there's got to be someone catching. And the service that I was providing to her, catching all of those bullets or arrows or whatever that she was pitching, as soon as I stopped catching, there was no virtue in them for her anymore. And I remember the conversation in which she said, she was trying to goad me into reacting, and she's incredibly skillful at it. And I just said, I don't know. I don't know what I think about that. She wanted me to answer one of two things. One would have been absurd, and the other one would have been to agree with her. So I wasn't going to do either in this situation. So I said, I don't know what I think about this. And she said, after all, you're not going to answer this question, are you? And I said, no, I'm not. She said, you're never going to answer it, are you? I said, no, I'm not. And she laughed. And the game was over. And that tactic was never used again. But it took years of practicing, of developing the nerve to sit in peace while someone else ain't, before that change occurred. And that practice, the sandpit where you practice that, is called sponsorship. So let's see if there are any others. What are your views? Oh, you don't want to ask my views. What are your views on the anonymity of AA given smartphones, both people recording intentionally and inbuilt listening programs on phones? Is this something AA in the UK or the US is concerned about? I don't know about the US. Honestly, amongst people I know, no one particularly cares. Partly because at meetings, our culture is to, with the best will in the world, we would love AA to be a perfectly safe place where no word that is spoken in the AA meeting other than the nuts and bolts of the AA program is conveyed to outside the room. But we've got human beings in here, so I never ever say anything in an AA room that I would not be comfortable being broadcast. That's the first thing. The second thing is I don't do anything I'm ashamed of. If I do, I make amends straight away, and then no one's got anything on me. And that's the real freedom. I spent a lot of years acting out other non-substance-based addictions in recovery, and that gives you a lot to hide. So I'm personally, this is a personal view, and this is something people disagree on massively. I would respect anyone else's right to privacy and anonymity, but I'm not terribly bothered about my own, except in as far as there's there's two principles. The principle of tradition 11, so no breaches of public anonymity at the public level, but also the anonymity principle of step 12, which is anything I've been given in AA is not mine. It comes from somewhere else and it's just passing through me. So no reliance on any other human being in AA. That's another anonymity thing, that the person who is used as the channel that God is using in that moment, they're not the person I rely on. So anonymity is important to me, but not because I'm frightened of what people are going to say or learn. And I'm open in my career, I'm open with colleagues about my alcoholism, and lots of people have conversations with me about that. Let's have a look at some step 11. Oh, there was a step 6 or 7 one about laziness. How do you deal with laziness? My experience of laziness is that I will catch myself not doing things and accuse myself of the sin of laziness. And in my case, and there can be lots of different things, but I think laziness is a function of something else. In my case, there are 2 reasons I get lazy. The first one is, I remember I did a step 5 with someone who was very religious a number of years ago, and kept shooting Bible quotations back at me, which were very helpful in that particular case. I don't do it to other people, but it was helpful when he did it to me. And one of the things he said was, I think it's in the book of James, a double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. And what surfaces in me as laziness is, to quote Sondheim again, standing in the middle of the living room floor, not going left, not going right. So nothing is being done, but I'm torn between 2 voices. And the only way around that, muscle won't get me through that. I need to go back to the decision-making room and say, which voice do I want to listen to? Because when I'm procrastinating, I'm torn between different voices, and I don't know which one I want to be listening to. The other thing, which brings me on to a step 12 issue, is burnout in AA. I'm going to say something a bit naughty, so you'll have to forgive me for this. In most of AA, service work burnout ain't a big issue. We should be so lucky that that was the major issue. But in certain parts of it, you know that thing that people often say that, 10% of the people do 90% of the work. I think that may be true in terms of AA service work. I think it's true with sponsorship. It's true with all sorts of things. And I've suffered from burnout. I don't know if anyone else has fallen asleep in listening to a step 5 or struggled to keep my eyes open. Falling asleep in meetings, falling asleep in service meetings and intergroup or region meetings may be more forgivable. But the service ethos that has been shown to me in AA, which is to be of maximum service to God, straight from page 77, which is the purpose of amends, is to fit myself to be of maximum service to God and the people around me. That ethos, particularly if you're in a group where lots of people are doing that, if there's some unreconstructed Al-Anon stuff going on, what that can produce is in me, is someone who is incredibly active, incredibly busy, maybe performing very well, but quietly angry, quietly desperate, and quietly just a little bit sad. Where the joy has gone out of it, the air has been let out of it. And you get home at 11 o'clock yet again, and you barely recognise the shadowy figure on the other side of the kitchen. Oh, it's my other half. Because you've been so involved in service work, in sponsorship. And the unreconstructed stuff is the sense, the Al-Anon stuff I was talking about is, if I don't do it, it won't get done. And I can't live with the idea that it won't get done. If I don't do it, it won't be done properly. There'll be such a mess if I let someone else do it, I have to do it. Or if someone asks me, being so flattered by it, if I can't possibly turn it down. And that ridiculous line, I never say no to an AA request. I never say no to a reasonable AA request. There are some crazy AA requests. My sponsor is someone who, I sponsor a lot of people, and I know he sponsors more than I do. But he's very strong on the line on page 17, I think it's 19. A much more important demonstration of our principles lies in our respective homes, occupations, and affairs. And you match that with the line, I think it's further up the same paragraph. Most of us spend much of our free time engaged in the kind of work we're going to describe. And in my experience, what that means is it's much of my free time, i.e. the time which is free once my other obligations have been fulfilled. So I've got to have a way in which I'm contributing to the world outside. I can't have AA being my everything, or my identity starts to get tied up in it, and that's where the real trouble starts. And you can get that difficulty with employees of AA sometimes, if they're AA members. I've seen that with sponsees of mine and friends of mine. I've got a career outside, I've got a household, I've got a family. I have to have affairs to practice the principles in, otherwise I have no material to share how the 12 steps actually work. And I must never neglect my mother, because of my 90-year-old mother in the care home. I must never neglect her because of AA things. I must not neglect my other half. Now, it can go to the other extreme. I mustn't become career-obsessed either. But I have to coordinate. I don't like the idea of balance, because a balance is something where you have 50-50 on each side. But I have to have an equilibrium there, like a mobile above a child's cot, where for it to spin properly, all of the weightings have to be correct. And those weightings for me have changed over time. But one of the most important things is that I've got to accept the gift of peace from my higher power first, before I have a hope in hell's chance of conveying it to someone else. If I'm not at peace, all of the work I do is done with the wrong spirit, and that spirit infects it. So I've got to be at peace first. And yes, a lot of that peace is achieved by the work that I do, but I've got to have space. There is time when my phone is turned off. I have to be having fun in my life. Now, what I consider fun, most people wouldn't consider fun. But I have to have things which I consider fun. A friend of mine says, he was invited to a party, he said, I'd rather sit on my own in a room empty but for a wooden chair and a Bible. Now, that's not my particular idea of fun, but people's idea of fun can vary. But I have to have fun, because people have got to have a sense of, if I put this work into AA, it's got, I've got to be enjoying myself. If I don't want to be 20 years sober and miserable and burnt out and angry and right about everything. My sponsor says that sobriety or recovery is like sex. If you're not enjoying it, you're not doing it right. So my primary aim is to accept the gift of peace myself, so I can carry it to others. And to do that, if I'm not at peace, I need to find out why. Why am I blocking my peace in this situation? But there is just a physical limit to how many things I can do in a day. And my job when I get an AA request is to help the person find the best person to fulfill the request. So when anyone reaches out for help, I want the hand of AA always to be there, and for that I'm responsible. I'm responsible for the hand of AA being there. I am not the hand of AA. I might be on a given day in a given situation, but in my home group, we go to great lengths to ensure that when people want sponsorship, they may end up with someone who is 1 year sober or 2 years sober, but has loads of time because they only have one sponsee, rather than everyone going to the same person. And when I sponsor someone, I won't sponsor them unless they're doing all sorts of odd bits of step work and reviews and daily reviews with lots of other people, so they're building a whole network so that when I'm on the wrong continent for 3 weeks, they're fine. There's no reliance on me, because then they might learn to be reliant on the higher power who stands behind all of us, so that the sponsorship is really a group effort. There was one about knitting, and I can't find it. There was literally one about knitting. Someone told me that I could connect to God just as much through knitting as through meditation. Is that wishful thinking? And my answer is, send me your patterns. I used to be, in Al-Anon, the joke is that they have in the meeting schedule, whether it's a knitting meeting or not. There's some people that the knitting drives them crazy, so they need to know that it's a knitting meeting before they go. It's the clacking, the constant clacking of the, or macrame, it's even worse, macrame, however you say it, knots and stuff. I used to be really sniffy about wacko concepts of God. And I used to be very sniffy about what I thought were wacko approaches to step 11. Until I went through this phase of using this Taoist. I know nothing about Taoism, but I had a Taoist meditation book, one of those page-a-day ones. And there was a reading where it said, if you pray hard enough to a rock, it will come alive. And it reminded me of when people say, my higher power was a doorknob, or my higher power was a chair, or the number 7 bus, or my friend Melody had whales as her higher power, and we thought it was the principality to the west of England. Actually, it was the marine mammal we discovered much later. And I've got a Hindu friend that says, the reason why they have all the little statues, I know nothing about Hinduism except what he tells me about it. But the reason people have all the little statues is not because that is literally God, but the concept of God is so distant that you need something in between which you can relate to. And whatever connects me to my higher power, to me, is valid. If it connects me, amazing. I'd much rather see a sponsee do something which connects them but looks nuts to me than go through something formulaic and kosher but which does nothing for them. So I've gone through phases of being relatively religious, and I can reel off prayers by rote and not mean any of them. But the important thing is the connection. And in step 11, the meditation, I believe what it says in the big book when it says we're going to give you some valuable suggestions on meditation. I believe them, and I take what follows to be instructions on meditation. And we consider our plans for the day. Before we do that, we ask God to direct our thinking. We ask for inspiration, intuitive thought, and a decision. And that's an interesting little trio, because if you look at the three levels that those operate on, inspiration at the level of spirit, intuitive thought at the level of mind, and decision at the level of the physical realm, that's where decisions get implemented. Spirit, mind, body, inspiration, intuitive thought, decision. The book is much more carefully written than people give it credit for. Just because there's that ridiculous passage with, shivering denizens of King Alcohol's manned realm, people think that it was, just a ridiculous flight of fancy. But there are some smart trains of thought which run through the whole book. But there's that line, we relax and take it easy. That's an instruction. So, and I find, I happen to be going through a yoga phase at the moment, and I do some meditation which is inspired by Eastern traditions as well. But it's to implement that, we relax and take it easy, and then I'm in a much better space to actually hear the still small voice. And if knitting chills you out and enables you not to stick the knitting needles in other people's eyes, then we're on the same side here. And people asked about what does my morning practice look like. I do my page 86 review of the previous day the next morning, because my mind is scrambled at night, whereas it's really clear in the morning. And the corrective measures that come out of that, there's no analysis in there. It's a straightforward set of questions. So, let me just get the exact wording. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? The binary question. Was I resentful? Yes or no? And I recall the situations in which I was resentful and release those up to my higher power. And just one little footnote on that. The only reason I'm resentful is because I haven't got my own way. And if that's a reason for anger, I'm deluded, because page 61 has told me that even if you get your own way, you won't be happy anyway. So I'm upset because I didn't get something which wouldn't make me happy if I got it. No analysis required, because that anatomy is the same for all resentments. Some seem more plausible than others. But that's not what it's about. It's about admitting it to my higher power, saying, I've done it again. And to be able to, this has to be done in a non-beating oneself up way. If I look at it with guilt, I'm deepening what lies beneath the resentment and the selfishness and the dishonesty and the fear, and I'm making it worse. So I've got to look at this stuff with my higher power and laugh at it and say, how ridiculous. Yet again, I've fallen for the ego's tricks yet again. And I think the most important line here, the two most important lines, but we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. At about 4 minutes 30 seconds, that's when I hit worry, remorse, or morbid reflection. I don't think I've ever done a Step 11 review which hasn't drifted into those things after about 4.5 minutes. There is literally no more juice to extract from the previous day, and the only thing left to do is to then, rehearse it again and again and again. I can't do that. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. I don't produce my own corrective measures. I say to my higher power, what should I do instead? And usually it's left field, and for the last few months, 9 times out of 10, I get a single corrective measure that comes through from my higher power, which is just chill out. If I can follow that, everything else flows automatically. Because there's no double-mindedness, I'm just relaxed in the palm of God's hand, I get on with what I need to do, there's no laziness, I work hard, I'm kind to people, I'm polite to people, I'm helpful. Do you know what I mean? If I get that right, everything else flows automatically. And then basically, what I do in the morning, I go through pages 86 to 88. I've got it divided in my mind into 12 little portions, 12 little segments. But the main thing is to go into the day knowing what the schedule is for the day, how I'm going to serve my higher power during that day. And that's it. There's nothing fancy there. Now, there is one line. So my 8th I've got 12 instructions in the morning. The 8th instruction is to say some set prayers, and I've got some set prayers, and the 9th one is to be quick to see where religious people are right. Now, to do that, and I do that every day, to do that, I've got to be listening to what religious people have said, and I've picked my own ones, and I'll tell you afterwards who they are. I won't say it from up here. It changes over time. Although using the word religious very loosely here. But I do a lot of outside work. I don't mean I see a therapist. I do see a therapist twice a year because this is someone else's joke, but I won't continue to sponsor him unless he occasionally comes to my home group. I don't mean to knock therapy. But I don't see a therapist right now. But when I say I do outside work, I do outside spiritual work. So I use some other stuff which expands and amplifies what I've learnt in the big book and puts flesh on the bones. If it contradicts what's in the big book, I just leave it on the shelf. If it amplifies, expands, enhances, enriches what's in the big book, then great. And I have had no difficulty with the particular spiritual tradition I'm following at the moment. I don't think I've found one thing which is at odds with the big book. And the two meld completely. If you give them enough time, they meld. And that has saved me. The other thing that I do as part of the Step 11 routine in the morning is I'm always looking at some level at the traditions and the concepts. We've got the 12 and 12. Sometimes I use the Al-Anon materials on the traditions and the concepts, which are very ample. There's Bill W.'s essays. There are some very good AAs over the years have written their own blurbs on the traditions and the concepts, particularly how to apply the underlying spiritual traditions, spiritual notions behind the traditions and the concepts in every area of their lives. And I work on that a lot. I bring that into my experience. And there was a situation, I'm going to share this recently, about how to actually apply the concepts in my life. One of my difficulties is one of the questions here is, let me see if I can find it, about the world. That whole topic. Where is it? How do you connect to a loving God in this insane political and environmental climate? I know you don't have crazy politics here, but we have crazy politics in Great Britain. We ceased fighting anything or anyone. How is this distinct from speaking up or standing up for what is right, or not simply turning our back on some obvious injustice or inappropriateness, or standing by while harm occurs. And I can make two mistakes with my relationship with the world, and they mirror the mistake that I can make in AA. What the concepts do as a structure is they take God's will in the abstract and turn it into some concrete action at the end of the line, like producing a new poster for public information. And I'm going to talk about the structure in Great Britain because it's slightly different, but it's in essence the same. There's this ultimate authority resides with the consciousness, the conscience of the AA fellowship as a whole. But the spiritual idea behind that is there is some kind of universal consciousness. That's where the authority lies, that's where the power lies. And what the concepts are as a structure, what they do is they channel that authority and that power into the material realm to get stuff done. So the way it works in AA, that consciousness expresses itself through the individual consciences of people in a group conscience meeting as they select their GSR, who becomes the voice of that conscience. And that gets carried to conference, and conference becomes a spiritual entity in which all of those ideas are now expressed through this funnel-shaped system into the conference, and then the conference gives recommendations to the board of trustees who then implement. And in Great Britain, the concept wording is slightly different in different countries, but in Great Britain the notion is that the trustees, they do some work themselves through their subcommittees, and they do other work through the constantly active corporations. So we've got a corporation which runs all of the offices, does the literature, does all of the ongoing daily public relations of AA, handling group correspondence, all conference organisation, all of that stuff. The trustees are not there the whole time. So they've delegated all sorts of work to the staff who work at the General Service Office. They delegate work to the members of the subcommittees who can perform service day in, day out, week in, week out throughout the year. But they retain custodial oversight. And this idea runs throughout the whole concepts, that although power and authority is delegated to do work, the ultimate authority remains at the next level up. So there is custodial oversight. It's the phrase is used in Concept 8, but the notion is there throughout the whole thing. So when our group elects someone to be a treasurer, it's not like, oh, they're the treasurer, we now deal with it, it's none of our business. It totally is our business, because we have custodial oversight of what the treasurer does. So the treasurer gets to produce a report, which it's everybody in the group's business to read that report and check that everything is kosher. Periodically to look at the file with all the papers at the front to make sure the rent is being paid, that the receipts are being given, or whatever the system is. That the money that is going to intergroup, that the intergroup is receipting that money to show that it's genuinely going there and not into the private bank account in the Cayman Islands. So just because you've delegated something doesn't mean that you no longer have any custodial oversight. You still retain the custodial oversight in Concept 8. And the difficulty, my two mistakes in relation to the world are becoming so obsessed with everything that is going on in society, in my local community, at a national level, at a global level, at a regional level, that I can't think of anything else, that I'm so stuck in the mud and the mire that I get covered in the mud myself and I can't see the wood for the trees. I can't see what's right and wrong. I'm just angry and engaged and very active and doing no good at all. And then the other mistake is to become so spiritual, none of that's any of my concern. And it talks about that in the big book. I think it's around 126, somewhere around there, where Father, as it says, has a stirring spiritual experience and shows amazing indifference to the problems of his family. So I've got to steer a line. I'm afraid my ego is very sticky. I find it very difficult to be actively engaged in social things and political things without getting sucked in. There are people who are amazing at it. And part of the other thing I learned from the concepts is that people who are given service need to be suitable for that service. It's best to find the people who are best for the job, not just trying to fit the service to make it so that everyone can do it. Not everyone is meant to be a treasurer. Seriously, not everyone can handle a spreadsheet or a bank account. Someone that can't type should not be the secretary of Intergroup. Someone that is terrible at scheduling and turning stuff around quickly, again, should not be the secretary of Intergroup. Everyone knows what their fortes are. And a proper application of the concepts means you find the right person for the job, and that is tested as part of the process, that people are vetted, that people get a chance to do an AACV and set out what their other experiences that they can bring to the role, because it's the service is for the fellowship, not for the individual. What does this have to do with anything? What it has to do with something is that my problem for many years, I mentioned having panic attacks because of environmental stuff, and I'm not the only person that happens to. And I would flip back and forth between being super involved, having to know everything, reading all the newspapers, reading all the IPCC reports, and getting so sucked in, I'm just blinded with panic, to going to the other end and trying to detach so much that I'm just going to separate myself from what is going on in the world. But the trouble is the world has a way of finding you. And the answer, who knew, actually lies in concept 8. That what the board does is it has its own activities that it has to carry out. I have my own activities that God has given to me to carry out in AA, in my family, in my local community, in my job. I have 2 jobs, in both of my jobs. In all of these areas, I have jobs to carry out. But I still, along with the rest of humanity, retain ultimate authority for the fate of humanity. So I can't get involved in everything. So I've chosen certain causes which I think are important, and I give an eye-watering amount of it. I don't know if it's a large amount of money, it waters my eyes to write the checks. It means I have to forego other things. So I delegate the active authority to these organisations to do work on my behalf and on behalf of the whole of humanity in the areas that I feel are important. And I exercise custodial oversight by once a year looking at the league tables and the rankings of different organisations that work in these areas to make sure that my money is going to the right area. I've got sponsees who are involved in similar areas who give huge amounts of their free time to these things because they have the temperament that suits. I do not have the temperament that suits this. And so the answer lay in the concepts. The answer to my cycle, my panic attacks at 4 a.m, lay in the study and awareness and understanding and practice of the concepts in my everyday life. No one will tell you this. But all of the answers are there. If you can't find the answers in the steps, they're in the traditions. If you can't find them in the traditions, they're in the concepts. And I'm now comfortable that I know enough about what is going on to exercise my custodial oversight. I see my job as earning money in order to enable my 12-step work in AA, and in order to keep my structure going, and in order for me to give money to organisations to do things that I believe matter in the world. I think I'm better at earning money than I am at being an activist, so I earn the money and give the money to activists. So I'm discharging my responsibility, but without getting super involved. And you see it in AA service the whole time, that people delegate something to the intergroup, and it's none of our business anymore, it's the intergroup's business. Then the intergroup gets it wrong and everyone's angry. But no responsibility has been taken. The concepts produce this amazing connection between the ultimate authority between the AA members themselves and the work that's carried out throughout the AA structure. And that acts as a model for me and the world that ultimate responsibility lies with me, but almost all of that has to get delegated. And as long as I'm discharging that, I'm doing the delegation, I'm providing resources, I'm exercising custodial oversight, then I can let it go. Then I can live in the day. Then I can turn the news off because I don't need it today. But I can't block it out. I remain part of that whole. And if you want to feel peace in the world, the only way I know how to do it is to remain aware and connected, and to know what my place in the totality of things is. And that is what has been the answer to my question, is finding my place in the totality of things, which is to be present wherever I am right here, right now, and where I think I'm going to be in about half an hour is at dinner, and I hope as many people as possible will come with us and have food together. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening. I love looking at your faces. There's so much joy and smiling and love in the room. It's just been wonderful. Thank you to the organisers. And should we close with the Serenity Prayer yet again? Should we hold hands in a circle? Right, Darren, would you like to take us out of Serenity?